Dun 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 dun. Happy Boxing Day! Boom! I'm Thundercloud. I'm celebrating Boxing Day. Well, welcome to Chillin Tuesday. It's not really chillin', is it? Oh well. Let me have a seat. Here we are. It's the... Take these gloves off. I'll be finding it a bit difficult to turn the page when Tinkerbell rings a little bell. I need a good punch in the head. My punching gloves, okay. Well, tonight I'm continuing with the Henry Lawson special. And I've reached 1893, so approximately 130 years ago. Long ago, young Henry Lawson wrote this poetry. He was born in 1867, and this was 1893. So he would have been, 26 at the time that he wrote this. He was in the prime and the beginning of his career, because he did start out in 87 as a 20-year-old. So he's 5 years into his career. So the first poem that I've got for you here is from in the days when the world was wide. And then the next one is as well, actually. But this one, first one today, which I'm reading out of A Campfire Yarn, Henry Lawson's complete works, 1885 to 1900. Sweeney. It was somewhere in September, and the sun was going down, when I came in search of copy to a Darling River town. Come and have a drink, we'll call it. 'Tis a fitting name, I think. 'Twas raining, for a wonder, up at Come and have a drink. 'Neath the pub house veranda, I was resting on a bunk when a stranger rose before me and said that he was drunk. He apologised for speaking. There was no offence, he swore. But he somehow seemed to fancy that he'd seen my face before. No offence, he said. I told him that he needn't mention it, for I might have met him somewhere I had travelled round a bit. I knew a lot of fellows in the bush and in the streets, but a fellow can't remember all the fellows that he meets. Very old and thin and dirty were the garments that he wore. Just a shirt and pair of trousers and a boot and nothing more. He was wringing wet and really in a sad and sinful plight. And his hat was in his left hand and a bottle in his right. His brow was broad and roomy, but its lines were somewhat harsh, and his sensual mouth was hidden by a drooping fair moustache. His hairy chest was open to what poets call the winned, and I would have bet 1,000 that his pants were gone behinned. He agreed, you can't remember all the chaps you chanced to meet, and he said his name was Sweeney. People lived in Sussex Street. He was camping in a stable, but he swore that he was right only for the blanky horses walking over him all night. He'd apparently been fighting, for his face was black and blue. He looked as though the horses had been treading on him too. But an honest, genial twinkle in the eye that wasn't hurt seemed to hint of something better, spite of drink and rags and dirt. It appeared that he mistook me for a long-lost maid of his, one of whom I was the image both in figure and in fizz. He'd have had a letter from him if the chap were living still, for they'd carried swags together from the Gulf to Broken Hill. Sweeney yarned a while and hinted that his folks were doing well, and he told me that his father kept the Southern Cross Hotel, and I wondered if his absence was regarded as a loss when he left the elder Sweeney, landlord of the Southern Cross. He was born in Parramatta, he said with humour grim, that he'd like to see the city. The liquor finished him, but he couldn't raise the money. He was damned if he could think what the government was doing here. He offered me a drink. I declined. 'Twas self-denial, and I lectured him on booze, using all the hackneyed arguments that preachers mostly use, things I'd heard in temperance lectures. I was young and rather green, and I ended by referring to the man that he might have been. Then a wise expression struggled to the bruises on his face, though his argument had scarcely any bearing on this case. What's the good of keeping sober, fellas, rising fellas, for what I might have been and wasn't, but doesn't trouble me at all. But he couldn't stay to argue, for his beer was nearly gone. He was glad, he said, to meet me, and he'd see me later on. He'd guessed he'd have to go and get his bottle filled again, and he gave a lurch and vanished in the darkness and the rain. And of afternoons in cities when the rain is on the land, visions come to me of Sweeney with his bottle in his hand, with the stormy night behind him and the pub veranda post, and I wonder why he haunts me more than any other ghost. Still, I see the shearers drinking at the township and the scrub, and the army praying nightly at the door of every pub, and the girls who flirt and giggle with the bushmen from the west. But the memory of Sweeney overshadows all the rest. Well, perhaps it isn't funny. There were links between us too. He had memories of cities, he had been a jackaroo, and perhaps his face forewarned me of a face that I might see from a bitter cup reflected in the wretched days to be. I suppose he's tramping somewhere where the bushman carries swags, caging round the wretched stations with his empty tucker bags, and I fancy that of evenings, when the track is growing dim, that he might have been and wasn't come along and troubled him. That's ironic, because Henry Lawson then ended up an alcoholic too. And that poem's about lecturing someone about the dangers of alcohol. This one's when the army prays for Watty, W-A-T-T-Y. When the kindly hours of darkness, save for light of moon and star, hide the picture of the signboard over Doherty's Horse Bazaar, when the last rose tint is fading on the distant mulga scrub, then the army prays for Watty at the entrance of his pub. Now I often sit at Watty's when the night is very near, with a head full of jingles and the fumes of bottled beer. For I always have a fancy that if I am over there when the army prays for Watty, I'm included in the prayer. Watty lounges in his armchair in its old accustomed place with a fatherly expression on his round and passive face, and his arms are clasped before him in a calm, contented way, and he nods his head and dozes when he hears the army pray, Salvation Army. And I wonder what does he ponder on the distant years and dim, or his chances over yonder when the army prays for him? Has he not a fear connected with the warm place down below, where according to good Christians all the publicans should go? But his features give no token of the feeling in his breast, save of peace that is unbroken and a conscience well at rest. And we guzzled long before the army came, and the loafers wait for shouters and they get there just the same. It would take a lot of praying, lots of thumping on the drum, to prepare our sinful straying, erring souls for kingdom come. But I love my fellow sinners, and I hope upon the soul that the army gets a hearing when it prays for Watty's soul. In the days when the world was wide. The next piece here is a long written prose piece called The Darling River, which is not what I'm here to do. I'm here to give you the poetry tonight. And another one, Luth on the Darling, the Union buries its dead. And then, oh look, we've got the cover design of his original book, Outback and Other Poems. It's an interesting name, The Union Buries Its Dead. I'll have to read that one later for sure. Okay, here we are. We've got All Onion Men. An onion spelt U-N-Y-U-N. All Union men. All right. Onion. 'Twas a big shed in the Darling. The Unions know it well, but mighty few in the Unions knew about the thing I tell. 'Twas a great shed for free labour, as the chaps was all aware, and the rep was told he'd best not try his funny business there. But the rep was straight, and the rep had grit. He tried his funny biz. He shoved the cause along a bit with 3 square mates of his. Their bunks stood in the corner. 'Twas called the Union Den, and on the post they pasted the sign, All Union Men. Now, 'twas a shed where Union talk was answered with a vim, and each was told to take a walk and take his swag with him. They knew the boss had marked 'em, they knew they'd get the sack, and they raised their cheque for a convert. Such men are found out back. Way down along the Darling there tramped 4 Union men, and 2-legged things from Whitley Kings camped in the Union Den. And a jackaroo got up to do a clever thing one day. He started there before 'em all to scrape that sign away. Then up rose Jack the Dingo, a rough old Darling slab, was known among the Unions as Crawlin' Jack the Scab. At least they called him Crawlin' Jack. When he wasn't in the place, they'd called him that behind his back, but never to his face. They got up, Jack the Dingo, and nasty was his tone. He said in shearing lingo, "You let that sign alone. You've got a union ticket, you cur, and what is more, you've got a sneaking reference from that last shed where you shore. I hate a gory union, and I'm game to say I do, but I think them chaps was better than a two-faced jackaroo. 4 bunks stood in the corner, 'twas called the Union Den, and on their post was written 3 words, all Union men. Free labour thought a mighty lot, but 'twas not much it said, and the sign stopped there while the dingo was shearing in the shed. The dingo was shearing in the shed, so the union breaker. Well, the next one, that's from Worker. That was published in a socialist magazine. Henry Lawson's mother had a couple of magazines herself, and Henry wrote for them as well. One was The Republic and the other one was The Dawn, which was a female suffrage one to get women the vote. Next one, Lake Eliza. The sand was heavy on our feet, a Christmas sky was o'er us, and 1/2 a mile through dust and heat, Lake Eliza lay before us. You have a long and heavy tramp, so said the last advisor. You can't do better than to camp tonight at Lake Eliza. We quite forgot our aching shanks, a cheerful spirit caught us. We thought of green and shady banks. We thought of pleasant waters, 'neath sky as niggard of its rain, as of his gold the miser. By Mulga scrub and lignum plain we'd tramp to Lake Eliza. A patch of grey discoloured stand, a fringe of tufty grasses, a lonely pub in Mulga scrub, it's all the stranger passes. He'd passed the lake a dozen times and yet be none the wiser. I hope that I shall never be as dry as Lake Eliza. No patch of green nor water seen to cheer the wary plodder. The grass as tough as fencing wire and just as good for fodder. And when I see it mentioned in some local advertiser, 'twill make me laugh or make me grin, the name of Lake Eliza. That's from the book The Rising of the Court. Well, the next one here is the Paroo River, which is in the Darling Downs in southwestern Queensland. The Paroo. It was a week from Christmas time, as near as I remember, and 1/2 a year since the rear we'd left the Darling timber. The track was hot and more than drear, the long day seemed forever, but now we knew that we were near our camp, the Paroo River. We, with blighted eyes and blistered feet, with stomachs out of order, half mad with flies and dust and heat, we crossed that Queensland border. I long to hear a stream go by, I long and see the circles quiver. I long to lay me down and die that night on Paroo River. 'Tis said the land out west is grand, I do not care who says it. It is an even, decent scrub, not yet an honoured desert. It's plagued with flies and broiling hot, curses on it ever. I really think that God forgot that country round that river. My mate, a native of the land, in fiery speech and vulgar, condemned the flies and cursed the sand, and doubly damned that mulga. He peered above, he peered about, no bushman he and clever. Now mind you keep a sharp lookout, we must be near that river. The nose bags heavy on each chest. God bless one kindly squatter. With grateful weights our hearts they pressed. We only wanted water. The sun was setting in the west, in colour like a liver. We fondly hoped to camp and rest that night on Burry River. Well, a cloud was on my mate's broad brow, and once I heard him mutter, I'd like to see that darling now. God bless that grand old gutter. And now and then he stopped and said in tones that made me shiver, it cannot be on ahead. I think we crossed the river. But soon we saw a strip of ground that crossed the track we followed, no barer than the surface round, but just a little hollowed. His brows assumed the thoughtful frown, this speech he did deliver. I wonder if we'd best go down or up that blessed river. But where, said I, is the bloomin' stream? And he replied, we're at it. I stood a while as in a dream. Great Scott, I cried, is that it? Why, that is some old bridle track. He chuckled, now, well, I never. It's nearly time you came out back. This is the Burry River. Well, no place to camp, no spot of damp, no moisture to be seen. If e'er there was, it left no sign that it had ever been there. But ere the morning, with heart and soul, we cause to thank the giver. We found a muddy water hole, some 10 miles down that river. The Paro, verses popular and humorous. That's where that was first published in. Okay, over passing the rats, the Brummy using some popular Australian mistakes. And then we've got St. Peter. So here we go, some popular Australian mistakes. This was from the Bulletin in 1923. An Australian mirage does not look like water. It looks too dry and dusty. A plain is not necessarily a wide open space covered with waving grass or green sward like a prairie. It's either a desert or a stretch of level country covered with some wretched scrub. That's his opinion, judgment. 3. A river is not a broad, shining stream with green banks and tall, dense eucalypti walls. It is more a string of muddy waterholes, a chain of dry waterholes, someone said. There are no mountains out west, only ridges on the floors of hell. There are no forests, only mongrel scrubs. This is really just because it's so ethnocentric, comparing it to England. It's funny, really. Their Australian poetical writers invariably get the coastal scenery mixed up with that of outback. Oh, really? An Australian Western homestead is not an old-fashioned gabled brick-end shingle building with avenues and parks, and the squatter doesn't live there either. A Western station at best is a collection of slab and galvanised iron sheds and humpies, and is the hottest, driest, dustiest and most God-forsaken hole you could think of. The manager lives there when compelled to do so. This was 1893, yeah, very long ago. The manager is not called the super, he's called the overseer, which name fits him better. Station hands are not noble, romantic fellows. They are mostly crawlers to the boss, which they have to be. Shearers, the men of the West, despise station hands. 10. Men tramping in search of a shed are not called sundowners or swaggies, they're travellers. A swag is not generally referred to as a bluey or Matilda, it's called a swag. No bushman thinks of going on the wallaby or walking Matilda or patting the hoof. He goes on the track when forced to it. You do not hump bluey, you simply carry your swag. You do not stow grub, you have some tucker, mate? Have some tucker, mate? You give it away, Item for our Australian artists. A traveller rarely, if ever, carries a stick. It suggests a common suburban loafer. Backyards, clothesline, roosting fowls, watchdogs, blind men, sewer pipes and goats eating turnip parings. 16 for artists. No traveller out back carries a horse collar swag. It's too hot, and the swag is not carried by a strap round the chest, but round one shoulder. So you're not like that over there, but it's more over one shoulder. Yeah. The tucker bag hangs over the other shoulder and balances the load nicely when there's anything in the bag. Yeah. It's not glorious and grand and free to be on the track. Try it. That's cool. It's not glorious and grand and free to be a swaggy on the wallaby track. Try it. Yeah. A shearing shed is not what city people picture it to be, if they imagine it at all. It is perhaps the most degrading hell on the face of earth. Ask any better class shearer. 19. An Australian lake is not a lake. It's either a sheet of brackish water or a patch of dry sand. 20. Least said about shanties, the better. We'll just repeat that. Least said about shanties, the better. 21. The poetical bushman does not exist. The majority of the men out back now are from the cities. The real native outback bushman is narrow-minded, densely ignorant, invulnerably thick-headed. How could he be otherwise? 22, this one's interesting. The blackfellow is a fraud. A white man can learn to throw the boomerang as well as an Aborigine, even better. A blackfellow is not to be depended on with regard to direction, distance or weather. A blackfellow once offered to take me to better water than at which we were camping. He said it was only half a mile. We rolled up our swags and followed him and his gin 5 miles through the scrub to a mud hole with a dead bullock in it. Also, he said that it would rain that night, and it didn't rain for 6 months. Moreover, he threw the boomerang at a rabbit and lamed one of his dogs, of which he had about 150. 23. Half the bushmen are not called Bill, the other half are not called Jim. We knew a shearer whose name was Reginald. Jim doesn't tell pathetic yarns in bad doggerel in a shearer's hut. If he did, the men would tap their foreheads and wink. In conclusion, we wish to heaven that Australian writers would leave off trying to make paradise out of the outback hell, if only out of consideration for the poor, hopeless, half-starved wretches who carry swags through it. and look in vain for work, and ask in vain for tucker very often. What's the good of making heaven out of a hell when, by describing it as it really is, we might do some good for the lost souls there? Being realistic about how tough and hard it was being a swagman and in those days walking about doing all that kind of work. Well, the next one I've got for you is St. Peter. Now, I think there is a likeness twixt St. Peter's life and mine, for he did a lot of tramping long ago in Palestine. He was Union when the workers first began to organise, and I'm glad that old St. Peter keeps the gate of paradise. When the ancient agitator and his brothers carried swags, I've no doubt he very often tramped with empty tucker bags. And I'm glad he's in heaven's picket, for I hate explaining things. And he'll think a union ticket just as good as Whiteley King's. He denied the Saviour's union, which was weak of him, no doubt, but perhaps his feet was blistered and his boots had given out. And the bitter storm was rushing on the bark and on the slabs, and a cheerful fire was blazing, and the hut was full of scabs. When I reached the great head station, which is somewhere off the track, I won't want to talk with angels who have never been out back. They might bother me with offers of a banjo mean and well, and a pair of wings to fly with when I only want a spell. I'll just ask for old St. Peter, and I think when he appears, I will only have to tell him that I've carried a swag for years. I've been on the track, I'll tell him, and I've done the best I could. And he'll understand me better than the other angels would. He won't try to get a chorus out of lungs that's worn to rags, or to graft the wings on shoulders that are stiff with hump and swags. But I'll rest about the station where the work bell never rings till they blow the final trumpet and the great judge sees to things. That's St. Peter. Well, what a day. I guess it's Boxing Day, isn't it? Today, verses popular and humorous. Next one, we've got Out Back. The old year went, and the new year returned in the withering weeks of drought. A cheque was spent that the shearer earned, and the sheds were all cut out. The publican's words were short and few, and the publican's looks were black, and the time had come as the shearer knew to carry his swag out back. For time means tucker and tramp you must, where the scrubs and plains are wide, with seldom a track that a man can trust or a mountain peak to guide. All day long in the dust and heat, when summer's on the track, with stinted stomachs and blistered feet, they carried their swags out back. He tramped away from the shanty there, when the days were long and hot, with ne'er a soul to know or care if he died on the track or not, excuse me. Someone's ringing the doorbell, doesn't matter. He tramped away from the shanty there where the days were long and hot, with never a soul to know or care if he died on the track or not. The poor of the city have friends in woe, no matter how much they lack, but only God and the swagman know how a poor man fares out back. He begged his way on the parched Paroo and the Warrego tracks once more, and he lived like a dog as the swagmen do to the Western Station shore. But men were many and sheds were full, for work in the town was slack. The traveller never got his hands in wool, though he tramped for a year out back. In stifling noons when his back was wrung by its load and the air seemed dead, and the water warmed in the bag that hung to his aching arm like lead, or the times of flood when plain were seas and the scrubs were cold and black, he ploughed in mud to his trembling knees and paid for his sins out back. He blamed himself in the year too late, in the heaviest hours of life. 'Twas little he dreamed that a shearing mate had care of his home and wife. There were times when wrongs from your kindred came and treacherous tongues attack, when a man is better away from home and dead to the world out back. And dirty and careless and old he wore as his lamp of hope grew dim. He tramped for years till the swag he bore swinged part of himself to him. As bullock drags in the sandy ruts, he followed the dreary track, with ne'er a thought but to reach the huts when the sun went out back. It chanced one day when the north wind blew in his face like a furnace breath, he left the track for a tank he knew 'twas a shortcut to his death. For the bed of the tank was hard and dry, and he crossed with many a crack, and oh, it's a terrible thing to die of thirst in the scrub out back. The drover came, but the fringe of law was eastward many a mile. He never reported a thing he saw, for it was not worth his while. The tanks are full and the grass is high, and the mulga off the track, where the bleaching bones of a white man lie by his mouldering swag out back. For time means tucker and tramp they must, where the plains and the scrubs are wide, with seldom a track that a man can trust, or a mountain peak to guide. All day long in the flies and heat, the men of the outside track, with stinted stomachs and blistered feet, must carry their swags out back. Tallytown, it's a short one from Freeman's Journal. Tallytown. A shearer tramped from borderland when sunset shed cut out. He scarcely felt the miles of sand, the hot plains baked with drought. His check was in his ragged clothes, the future wore no frown, when blazing white before him rose the roofs of Tallytown. From Tallytown the shearer fled when Christmas time was past. His cheeks were drawn, his eyes were red, his breath came rough and fast. Along the track he ran and yelled till devils struck him down. The landlord banked the cheques he held that day in Tallytown. Knocked up. I'm lying on the barren ground. It's baked and cracked with drought, and dunno if my legs or back or hard as most wore out. I'm too knocked up, I've got no spirits left to rise and smooth me aching brow. I'm too knocked up to light a fire and boil a billy now. Oh, it's tramping, tramping, tramping in flies and dust and heat, or it's tramping, tramping, tramping through mud and slush and sleet. It's tramp and tramp for tucker, one everlasting strife, and wearing out your boots and hard in the wasting of your life. They whine, oh, lost and wasted lives, yet idleness and crime. I've wasted mine for 20 years and grafted all the time. Never drunk the stuff I earned or gambled when I sure that somehow, when you're on the track, your life seems wasted more. A long dry stretch of 30 miles I've tramped this broiling day, all for the one-off chance of a job 100 miles away. There's 20 hungry beggars wild for any job this year, and 50 might be at the shed while I am lying here. The sinews in me legs seem drawn red hot, and it's the truth. I seem to weigh a ton and ache like one tremendous tooth. I'm stung between my shoulder blades, my blessed back seems broke. I'm too knocked out to eat a bite. I'm too knocked up to smoke. A blessed rain is coming too, there's oceans in the sky. And I suppose I must get up and rig the blessed fly. The heat is bad, the weather's bad, the fly is a crimson curse, the grub is bad, mosquitoes damned, but rheumatism's worse. I wonder why poor blokes like me will stick so fast to breath, though Shakespeare says it's in the fear of something after death. But through eternity be cursed with God's almighty curse, whatever that same something is, I swear it can't be worse. For it's tramp and tramp and tramping through hell across the plain. And it's tramp and tramp and tramping through slush and mud and rain. A living worse than any dog without a home and wife, and wearing out your heart and soul in the wasting of your life. It's a sad song about a hard life. The great grey plain. Out west, where the stars are brightest, where the scorching north wind blows, and the bones of the dead gleam whitest, and the sun on the desert grows. Yet within the selfish kingdom, where man starves man for gain, where white men tramp for existence, wide lies the great grey plain. No break in its awful horizon, no blur in the dazzling haze, save where by the bordering timber the fierce white heat waves blaze, and out where the tank heat rises or looms when the sunlights wane, till it seems like a distant mountain low down in the great grey plain. No sign of a stream or fountain, no spring on its hot, dry breast, no shade from the blazing noontide where a weary man might rest. Whole years go by when the glowing sky never clouds for rain, only the shrubs of the desert grow on the great grey plain. From the camp while the rich man's dreaming come the traveller and his mate, in the ghastly dawnlight seeming like a swagman's ghost out late, and the horseman blurs in the distance while the stars still remain, a low faint dust cloud haunting his track on the great grey plain. All day long before them the mirage smokes away, the daylight ghost of an ocean creeps close behind all day, with an evil snake-like motion as the waves of a madman's brain. 'Tis a phantom not like water out there on the great grey plain. There's a run on the western limit where a man lives like a beast, and a shanty in the mulga that stretches to the east, and the hopeless men who carry their swags and tramp in pain. The footman must not tarry out there in the great grey plain. Out west where the stars are brightest, where the scorching north wind blows, and the bones of the dead seem whitest, and the sun on the desert glows. Out back in the hungry distance that brave hearts dare in vain, where beggars tramp for existence, there lies the great grey plain. 'Tis a desert not more barren than the great grey plain of years, where a fierce fire burns the hearts of men, dries up in the fount of tears, where the victims of greed insane are crushed in a hell-born strife, where the murdered souls of a race are murdered on the great grey plains of life. Okay, so yeah, in the days when the world was wide, that was then where that was published originally, and there's quite a few again story ones in here. There's a really quick one called Western Stars. It's an 8-line poem. On my blankets I was lying, too tired to lift my head, and the long hot day was dying, and I wished that I was dead. From the west the gold was driven, I watched the death of day, and the distant stars in heaven seemed to draw my heart away. Well, there you go. Look, that's my Henry Lawson 1893 reading for tonight, and because nearly everything else that he wrote that year, apart from a couple, there's a few more coming up, but that's where I'm up to now, page 302. So I will see you next week for Chillin Tuesday here on YouTube. Now don't forget, if you really liked tonight, give it a thumbs up. Thank you very much, because your thumbs up down there below means that my metrics go up. If you even write a comment like thank you, even just writing thank you helps me in the metrics, so we can get this out to other people. Okay, it's the same with the shorts. Share the shorts that I'm putting up as well. Thank you very much. And then down in the link underneath is my PayPal PayPal ID. Just paypal.me/at Australian Poetry Hall. And here we are at the Australian Poetry Hall of Fame. I'm Thundercloud, here, washing away the garbage, leaving rainbows after rains on this Chillin Tuesday, Boxing Day. Come on, yeah. Boxing Day. Well, yeah, that's it. It's the day after Christmas, 26th of December, 2023. And I will see you here, same place, another day tomorrow for Wednesday Words, open mic poetry night. That's also here. So if you're a poet, you're around and you want to come and do some poetry, get to Gyra on a Wednesday at 6:30, because here's your chance to perform at the Australian Poetry Hall of Fame. All right, I will see you later. I'm washing away the garbage, leaving behind rainbows. I'm thundercloud, whooshing away. I've got some more hailing and raining and stuff and thundering to do. I'll see you later. Dun 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 dun.